Hey there, let's talk about a great all-purpose, sort of multi-use, dare I say, one-tool type knife that's been acquired by me. This is the Ontario SP46 Boar Skinner is the sort of more official name, but I'll prefer to just go by their codes. The SP40 series has 5160 spring steel. And it's a special spring steel. It's a special 5160. It's been very thoughtfully heat treated by the designer of the, designer of the range, Mr. Maragni, I think his name was. There's a really good video by Nut and Fancy on Mr. Maragni and his philosophy behind this knife, and it's quite a good listen because he does have some proper thoughts about sort of differentially heat treating edges and spines and all that sort of stuff, so it's really quite interesting. So what I'm saying is quite a cheap steel has been, quite thoughtfully used and utilized to get a really good result, as you'll see during my testing. So what is this knife? This is I guess you'd call it a survival knife. Perhaps it's got some sort of, it's got the hunting or aggressive, stabbing, slashing type of aesthetic as well, just due to this crossguard. But overall, my purpose of use and my recommended use for this knife is as a general camp slash, if you need it to be, survival or shelter prep or all that sort of thing type knife. It's about the same size as the Falkniven A1. I was surprised by that. I thought it was going to be a little bit smaller. So that's my A1, my beloved Falkniven A1 there. Actually, they're very sort of similar purpose knives when you kind of think about it. The only difference being this is a $70 knife and this is a $350 knife. So you get the 6-inch blade. It isn't the 1/4 inch thick, but it's getting there. It's almost there. It'll be about 3/16 thick, which is definitely plenty for a survival knife. The edge, it's a nice sweeping belly, obviously plain edge, and in my experience so far it's held up really, really well. Handle is the Ontario handle. You've seen these handles on a couple of other of my knives, the SP8 heavy machete and the SP5 Bowie heavy Bowie. And apart from this cross guard, it's pretty much the same handle, and it's a good handle. I'm fond of this handle, and on this knife, it's actually perfect because this knife's not going to be doing such high impact tasks. My one complaint of the handle was these grooves digging in upon impact isn't actually a complaint anymore. It actually contributes to a really, really solid grip. It doesn't feel like a highly refined. This is quite a this plastic here that Falkniven have done, it feels much more solid, it doesn't budge. This kind of feels cheaper, it leaves kind of a stickiness to the hand after you handle it initially as well. So it's definitely more rubbery, but definitely a very comfy handle. And because you're not doing those chopping tasks, often a complaint was that this hook back here would dig into your pinky finger when you chopped. And while I did some chopping just to test the edge and to test the blade, it's not something you would be using this knife for, especially not on heavier logs, things that are actually going to make the impacts that this is going to cause you issues. So anyway, what did I do with this knife? I did some splitting first. Splitting for me there's always a sense of nervousness because I've failed a couple of knives on the wood that I split. I split fairly seasoned red gum that's gradually become more seasoned the longer I've had it. And it's hard, it's unforgiving wood, it's full of knots. This knife just plowed through it. It's 5160, which is a tough steel. I lost a bit of confidence in 5160 after the tip of the buck split off, which had a very fine tip, but this also has a rather fine tip. And I've had no such issues with this one at all. So, as you see in the footage, set this knife on the back of the wood, a couple of reasonable strikes, and the flat grind, like certain other video reviewers swear by, the flat grind of this knife just plowed through. And I think because it's such a broad knife, perhaps, I guess it's got more blade and more surface to carry the strain of the wood, so I had no adverse effects from battening through the really hard wood. I went straight through a knot by the end of that same horrible hardwood, and there is no adverse effects. And I know batoning doesn't really damage the edge too much, but the knife is still fairly you know, utility sharp anyway. It's about as sharp as it came from the factory. It still slices paper, and it'll slice. Sorry, my paper's got WD-40 on it, but it'll slice, yeah, well enough. Even after all the testing, I haven't touched it up at all. Probably a little bit of a hiccup spot partway through, but really, for a big working mid-carbon steel knife, to still have this sort of edge on it, it'll definitely be that heat treat that I was talking about, that thoughtfulness. So yeah, battening, just fine. Went straight through. It's about as thick as the Vox rolled. It's made of, you know, supposedly lesser steel, D2 versus 5160, and completely outclassed and outperformed that rolled, which probably I think it did end up having some sort of issue, but this one doesn't have the issue. That's what I'm saying. This spring steel in this example of the knife absolutely powered through. I then moved on to some silly chopping, and by silly chopping I mean chopping against just a big large stump log that obviously I'm not going to try and chop through. It's just more of a test of the edge holding and of the grip, and did just fine. As you just saw, I chopped up some paper with it. I hacked into a big piece of dead red gum, and yeah, I could hear it chinking off like as it was hitting that. It's an ironwood, it's just so hard. I could hear it chinking off the wood, and I thought, oh, well, that's the edge gone, but surely not. It's absolutely fine. Cuts through the bark, no problems, but once it does get to the wood, this knife's too small to be a chopper, and it's not quite heavy like the A1, the A2. This A2 will chop better than it because it's just a bit thicker, just a bit of a heavier knife, much more blade heavy. This knife's much more balanced. It's a lighter knife. It would probably weigh about 2/3 the weight of the A2. Not really going to be a chopping knife. The big thick blade would make it better than probably others in its class of thickness. Like, so this would chop better than, say, the Butt Compadre, for example, or the Gerber Strong Arm with the 5 to 6, the 5 to 6 inch blade knives. Going to chop better than those, but still not the purpose of the knife. Then I cut some man-made materials. So I cut some really nasty those plastic sprinkler piping, and no problems there at all. That was after all the testing, and it takes a few goes, that stuff, but I haven't yet to have a knife that just cuts straight through that sort of stuff. Like, it's that's just hard plastic. It's fine. The paracord, not as easy as like a high-end pocket knife, but definitely cut it there. Definitely going to do the job. It's the knife's kind of got this cleaver quality to it, where it's it feels like you could really use it as in like a camp kitchen for like properly butchering up meat as well. It's got that sort of like you just kind of whacking it down on the. Really feels quite a natural thing for the knife to be doing. See what I mean? Just cool. Like I just really am enjoying this type of blade. I haven't really had a blade that's sort of shaped and behaves this way before. When I got to some wood carving, this isn't an ideal carving blade. I just found it difficult to carve with. I'm not sure if it's the distance between your hand and the working edge of the blade. The thing is, it's just not a Mora. It's not going to carve like even a smaller knife. You just have that your core. You think of a knife a bit like a human body. The core strength of the knife, the part that does all the real work and everything radiates from it, is this point here. So where your hand is just before the blade, and you can really work. Like, you see those Puko knives, you see the Mora knives. Using that core strength of the blade, you've got it right there. So you can really anything I put there is going to come apart really, really well. That's the Falkenhayn F1, by the way, much smaller knife. So yeah, it's because of that distance, I think, as well as probably the flat grind. Just carving it, at least my hard Australian woods, not as easy as something with perhaps a more steep grind, more steep edge perhaps. Just not as good, so not the best carving knife I've ever used. So, bit of a knock there. Didn't really enjoy carving with it. It does bite in, like it bites in, fairly well, but it's just not. Just doesn't do it as well as like a not really any of the other edges, or I'd prefer a convex, or I prefer a Scandi much before I chose a flat. Even a saber grind just seems to get more purchase on it. So that's probably just partly my use, but also I think it's partly the grind. But if you're looking for a knife that does everything, it'll do that well enough for you to just be able to take this knife and get everything done, unless you're thinking of carving like door handles and, you know, camp hinges and things like that. So that's the only sort of knock I'd give it. With regards to the powder coating, it's a mid roughness powder coating. It's not like the real thick stuff you get on the Schrade knives, which comes really sort of like quite lumpy and rough, but then it's nowhere near the sort of the DLC of this this Falkenhaven stuff here. Just it's probably just paint, or feels a bit like paint, or the DLC that Cold Steel used, which is in my opinion the best black blade coating you can get. It has to be coated because this is a mid carbon steel, so it'll rust fairly well if you don't take care of it. But as I always do, a couple of jets of WD-40, wipe it down, or just leave it and it'll gradually dissolve away most of the sap, and like all that wood will just peel off when I take it out of the sheath tomorrow. On the sheath I'm in two minds about. I think the sheath is well made. I think it's a fine sheath. It's just the wrong sheath for this knife. I'll roll in some other footage of like me going more in depth on the sheath, but for a start, the knife doesn't go hardly any way into the sheath. It goes maybe 2/3 of the way into the sheath. It's a sheath for obviously all the knives in this series that are below, you know, 8 inches or however, you know, big. It's I can see why they do it. They sell this knife for 70 Australian dollars, which is the cheapest knife you can get of this size that's made by a really good company. Even the Schrades cost more in Australia than that. So I got this from the Outfitter Country eBay seller. It's the cheapest you can get, it really is. So you can see, you could even get a worse sheath and you'd probably be, you know, fair enough, the knife should be good, so the sheath's really bad. If you had a bigger knife, like you could use, this would be a fine sheath for like an old hickory butcher knife or something like that, but it's just not the right sheath for this knife. What I am planning on doing, I think this isn't just going to be a channel knife, this is going to be a me knife, I think, because I really do like it. So I'm going to do some customizations. I'm going to cut off this because I think it would be better just going straight across for my purposes. I'm not going to be stabbing this into boars. I'm not a boar hunter, so I'm not going to be stabbing and skinning boars with it. So I don't need that extra protection of a cross guard sort of thing. So I'll probably be cutting that off and probably resheathing it, I think, because I really do like the knife quite a bit, and it handles really well and it's very light and very nice. So yeah, overall. Oh, by the way, if it is something that interests you, the spine does strike sparks, but not amazingly because of that coating. But it is a flat spine, so once you do a few goes, you get the coating off a certain point of the blade, you'll throw some sparks. But do you know what? Fire steels, they come with strikers for a reason, you know. So just use the striker. That's kind of my, you know, my general opinion. If you've got a fire steel, you've probably got a striker or something better, like at the back of a key or something to you know, do your striking with. So anyway, that's that, and that's the knife, and I'm really happy with it, and I'd heartily recommend this blade. I'll just put it up against some other knives just so you get some perspective on how big it is. So Falkenhaven A2, sorry, Falkenhaven F1 down there. Let's grab something else. Let's put what's a commonly known knife, let's put the Mora Companion underneath it as well. So you know, if you're going on a complete expedition, one of these, do you no worries. Going on a proper, you know, hunting, gathering, you know, going on alone, bring an axe as well. But you know, without any of this stuff, that'd do most of your tasks if you're really struggling. So that'll do us for today, dudes. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.